final aspects and details of the deal are currently being discussed and will be announced shortly. In addition to many other elements of the agreement, the Strait of Hormuz will be opened. The president also said that the agreement was subject to the approval of a number of other countries in the Middle East, not just the US and Iran. Significantly, Iran's Fars news agency has been reporting that the Strait of Hormuz would remain under Iran's management. That's contrary to President Trump's announcement. Let's get more now. We can bring in our North America correspondent, Peter Bose, who's been tracking this story for us all night. And Peter, walk us through what we're hearing from the president and some of the details that were in that post there on Truth Social.
This is, Carl, I think, a potentially significant development, but I think we've got to have the caveat that we've heard positive statements before from the president relating to the possibility of a deal being done between the US and Iran. But certainly over the last several hours, and we know that the president actually cancelled his weekend plans, including going to the wedding of his son, to be in the White House to, now we know, speak to a number of Gulf leaders about, as he put it, a memorandum of understanding pertaining to peace. And clearly this is crucially important to those Gulf states, because were there to be more military action between the United States and Iran, it would be those other Gulf states that could potentially feel any retaliation from Iran. So a number of factors, I think, converging here to make this interesting. However, I think we should be cautious, because the president is saying that this is an agreement that has been largely negotiated and is still subject to an agreement between the US and Iran. And crucially, he doesn't, in his quite long Truth Social post, he doesn't mention nuclear weapons. We know that the nuclear issue has been at the heart of President Trump's demand that Iran never get nuclear weapons. And this issue of the Strait of Hormuz, which the president says this agreement would mean the strait, this crucial waterway, reopening. Since the post of the president, we've heard from state media in Iran suggesting that they believe the strait would continue to be under Iranian management.
Our North America correspondent, Peter Bose, there for us. Peter, thank you very much. So those are the details that we're getting from President Trump's Truth Social account. But in terms of any direct comments from the Trump administration, what we heard from the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio most recently was actually in India earlier. He was commenting on the situation, whether or not it would be solved one way or another. Take a listen.
Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. The straits need to be opened without tolls. They need to turn over their enriched uranium. They need to turn over their highly enriched uranium. We need to address that issue. We need to address the issue of enrichment. These are the president's points consistently. And his preference is always to deal with it in a diplomatic way. The president's preference is always to solve problems such as these through a negotiated diplomatic solution. That's what we're working on right now. But this problem will be solved, as the president's made clear, one way or the other.
Well, joining us now live, Ray Takei, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. What do you make of what we're hearing from the president, saying that a deal has largely been negotiated, but some details should be released soon?
Well, the details will be very important, but this appears to me to be a sort of an interim deal where both parties agree to opening up the Gulf traffic to maritime commerce, and then they deal with all the thorny issues, including the management of the Gulf waterways and all the issues that Secretary Rubio mentioned, the nuclear issue and so on and so forth. So this will be an interim measure to relieve economic stress on both countries, United States, Iran, and the global economy. And once again, they try to deal with the other issues. They may not be able to resolve those issues, and this may essentially be punted down the street and down the road for another 60 days or so, which I think is the period of this interim deal that is being suggested.
Yeah, I think it's worth repeating, and this is something that our correspondent Peter Bose brought up. But, we have heard several times where we thought a deal was close. We've heard from both sides saying that, there were points where they were agreeing and disagreeing. I mean, does it feel to you like this will be a deal that will end up sticking, that actually, will go into effect?
I think it's possible for the Gulf traffic to resume. Both Iranians and the Americans and the regional states are interested in resumption of that traffic. But there are issues beyond resumption of traffic. As you mentioned in one of the Fars News stories, Fars News is affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They're essentially saying we continue to be supervisory management of the Gulf. If that's the case, then the Gulf is open so long as the Iranians want it to remain open.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because obviously before the war began, Iran did not exert control over the Strait of Hormuz. Does it feel to you like this deal is setting the table anyway for, something that the president might want that fulfills the stated war aims that he's been laying out over the past couple of months?
Well, the stated war aim has evolved. It has been everything from regime change to complete disarmament and so on and so forth. So there is no stated war aim. There are stated war aims. And the most recently, of course, is the one that's taxing the global economy, namely cessation of maritime traffic through the Gulf. And that's what they seem to be concerned about the most at this juncture.
Looking at this statement from President Trump, there were several names of leaders mentioned in here from several different countries, talking about Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Bahrain. He said he spoke with Israel's prime minister. What do you make of just this long list of countries that seem to be involved in this agreement?
Well, that's not unusual for countries in the region to be appraised of what is happening in this bilateral negotiations. I suspect most of those Arab countries will sign off to it. I think it'll be more difficult for Israelis to accept it. They will have to accept it, namely because it essentially, from their perspective, removes the conflict, and essentially all other issues, which are very thorny and detailed, will remain unresolved and linger on. So I'm not quite sure if this will set well in Tel Aviv as we speak.
But what about Iran? How do you think Tehran views things here? How much ground maybe does it feel like it's been giving? We got the hint from several of Iran's leaders that they felt like they had some leverage when it came to a deal.
They certainly have proven that through resilience and survival, they can essentially inject their perspective in these negotiations. They're not acting as supplicants. They're not acting as a defeated power. They're not acting as a country that is in war with a superpower and all the imbalances of strength. So in that sense, they can walk out of this, if this is a deal, with some degree of confidence in their ability to withstand 40 days of bombing from superior powers. And that testifies to the resilience and testifies to how dangerous this regime could indeed be.
Ray Takei, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Always great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, on that story as well, President Trump says he had a separate call with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which he said went very well. Our correspondent Emer Nader is in Jerusalem. He says that Israel has felt on the sidelines of this broader peace process.
You're definitely getting that sense indeed. I mean, you have to remember at the start of this war, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu presented themselves as equal partners, allies. It's widely accepted that Prime Minister Netanyahu talked President Trump into launching this war, presenting regime changes, perhaps as simple as what the US did in Venezuela. Clearly, it didn't go that way. We now know Prime Minister Netanyahu was very keen to return to striking Iranian regime sites to cause as much damage as possible. But you heard from President Trump this week saying of Prime Minister Netanyahu that he'll do whatever I want him to do. And then you've had these incredible reports in US media suggesting that there was a very tense phone call between the two this week in which President Trump laid out how he's going to pursue the diplomatic path with Iran. And Prime Minister Netanyahu was apparently incandescent. His hair was on fire. And today in the New York Times, we've read that Israel is apparently so sidelined, so cut out of the information loop about what's going on, that they're having to turn to their intelligence assets in Iran and friendly leaders in the region for updates. So the image we're getting from the outside is of President Trump cutting out the belligerent Netanyahu. But then again, of course, this could all change if the ceasefire talks do break down and there is a return to fighting, and we could see the two becoming united once again.